So I've already been presented, so I'm gonna skip that. I've been part of the coding for a long time now, and every time I faced problems in Vue applications that didn't have a solution that felt right for me, I've tried to come up with solutions that had, in my opinion, an intuitive, nice to use API. And one of the solutions, one of the problems rather, that I haven't actually fixed for a very long time is data fetching. And so that's going to change because that's what I want to show you today. It's a project I've been working on for the past year or so, which is called Colada, and it's a way to improve the UX, or at least that's how I like to say it. But before talking about Colada itself, I kind of have to talk about UX a little bit. So I want to go a few years back in time, so just about 4,000 or 6,000 years ago in ancient China, when we have this emergence of concept that you might have heard about called feng shui, which nowadays we mostly hear about to talk about how to organize the bedroom so everything flows. But the idea, it's more general than that, right? It's a lot about ergonomics, and more specifically ergonomics in space. So if you could pick one sentence to describe it, I picked this one. The best space is one in which the arrangement of objects is aligned with the space flow of energy. And of course, in 6,000 years ago, there wasn't any digital things or anything, but the interfaces or so we could think about is the space we are working in. And this concept of ergonomics is a little bit timeless. You will see that later on in Greece, Hippocrates, the father of medicine, in the context of surgeon workspace, he says that the tools must be positioned in a way that things flow. So we're talking about, I'm summarizing the quote, we're talking about how to organize, how to optimize the space, but this time not just so it feels right to be in this space, but to feel right doing a task in this context, the surgeon. And then if we go a little bit further in time, we're going to skip a few years, we can see Henry Dreyfus, which was a industrial designer in 1955, saying the same about ergonomics, but from another perspective. And I think this point is important because we have this concept of friction. So basically we have the opposite, right? When you have good ergonomics, things flow, and when you don't have good ergonomics, generally you have friction. And what I like about this vision is that we start seeing it as an improvement point. So something we iterate over. And I think this speaks a lot more to web development, because that's usually how we work. Because we can ship things a lot, we can iterate over a product and make it better and better. But the idea is still the same, right? We just see the two sides of the coin. And what else? Oh yeah, one important thing to say about Henry Dreyfus is that he also contributed in a way with his ideas to the cognitive science. So he wasn't part of that, but scientists were attracted by these ideas and they started more to research about cognitive science. So nowadays we can leverage actual science data to know that some patterns are going to be beneficial or destructive for our user experience. And I cannot finish talking about UX without talking about when was the term coined. And so Don Norman coined this term when he was working on Apple, saying that, well, there was no other term to describe UX. And it makes sense because we're really taking into consideration quite a lot of things. But I want to go back to the friction point and talk about the browser. When we talk about a browser, the main contact is the URL bar, and this is already friction. Now, I think the past, when we look at these things about the ergonomics and friction, the past is too idealistic, right? We come up with something that is perfect, things flow. But having this idea on friction and how to reduce it is really going to help us to make UX better. If we look at the browser, the first thing we do is we type something and we go to that page. And depending on the network connection, which I clearly slowed down a little bit on this video, things are going to load and then things are going to appear. And depending also on the user perspective, their individual story, their experiences, they may already form an opinion around the website they are visiting, the application they are visiting, even before they actually use it. This is commonly known as the halo effect, which is a cognitive bias, which in general, it simply means that when something is beautiful or appealing aesthetically, we are going to often consider everything else around that object, person, is also better than it actually is. And what's interesting and what I really like is that some studies show that people form an idea of a page or a product in the 51st millisecond they see an interface. So they're gonna form an idea even before you run any JavaScript, which I think is very funny. Now, if we use this website, we're gonna see that the URL being a pointer fraction was only the beginning. Everything else, everything else comes with friction because everything comes, it's related to an asynchronous operation, sending a request to the browser, getting back some information. And now if we think about the way Henry Dreyfus was defining a good interface, we clearly failed because, well, everything here is friction basically. But I'm a little bit playing with words because this is not really a web application. This is more like a static website. It's a web, but not an application. And so I want to talk more about applications, which is what we build. The truth is managing the loading state, errors, and consistency across your application is a big deal. It's a big deal not only because it can make the user feel very comfortable using your application and trusting your application, but also because it's not that easy. So you might think, well, in Vue, I can just use a fetch. I can put that on unmounted and I just display the data. And yeah, this is very simple to get started. And I think that's also one of the main selling points of Vue is that it's so easy to get started with the basic. But then you need to keep adding things, right? So for example, you might think, oh, I could move the await outside of the unmounted and add some loading state with suspense. And you could use some skeleton UI, which I personally don't really like, but it's this idea of having a placeholder of the UI so that without any data, you can display something that looks a little bit like what's going to be displayed once you have the data. And the main idea is you can avoid layout shift and keep the user a little bit in flow. Now, this is good when it's fast. So if the placeholder stays there for maybe a second, that's fine. But over that, it kind of breaks the confidence of the user. Now, I don't know if you are like me, but when I see a placeholder like this, longer than 3 seconds, usually I freak out a little bit and I open the DevTools and see if there is any error because maybe, I don't know, AdBlock blocked something and things do not work. So what happens when I want to say what with this is that this pattern has been so overused that those that were misusing it, using it where it shouldn't have been used when the request is too long, well, are creating a bad experience for other users because the placeholder, they all still look the same. So your brain is going to connect this idea of placeholder to a generic placeholder and connect all experiences together, smash together, instead of if you have something a little bit more specific to your page than a placeholder, then your brain is not going to connect that image, that loading experience to every other loading experience they have. But to me, every time I see the placeholder just stay on the screen, I'm like, what did it go wrong? And the idea is going to be, as you may understand now, is reduce the wait time. Now, how do we do that? Of course, we can make all the async operation faster, right? We can make the server run faster, which is not something we can always achieve. But we can also start things sooner if we know that we're going to start them. We can request something sooner, for example, prefetching. And we can also, and this is my favorite, make them feel faster, right? And I think most of the tricks are going to revolve around this feeling. And you might not notice, but we also have these things in real life. I'm going to show you some real examples afterwards. So this is what Pinia Colada is. It's a Vue plugin built on top of Pinia that is going to help you improve these metrics, reduce this friction when it comes to async state management. And it's a set of primitives. We have a query cache, which is a Pinia store, and we have queries. You can use them with, you can create them with use query. You have define query options and define query. They are pretty much the read operation of server state. But I say server state because usually we have a server that operates on a database and send data back to the client, but it doesn't have to be that way. It can be any asynchronous operation, any way of storage. It doesn't have to be a server. And then we have mutations, which we're going to write, right? So we have kind of like the get and the post in a simplified way, but it's not limited to the kind of fetch you do. It's just about, am I reading data or am I changing data? And on top of that, it's very light. It's about 2.5 kilobytes, and it has a very extensible API. And the cool thing about this is that we can add plugins without actually making the library heavier. So let me show you the main concept. The main concept is going to be query. Query is going to be the core of this library, because most of the time you read data, and it's very almost impossible having to modify data without having to read it. But sometimes you have applications that only read data. And so you notice that we have two things that are required for queries. We have keys and we have the query. Now the key is just going to be something that defines uniquely these data, and the query is going to be an asynchronous function that returns the data itself. So as long as you return a promise, that's okay. And then what we get is the state and the async status. Now, this is what is going to allow you to display in any custom way you need, because that's the bad thing about all these patterns, is that there is no silver bullets. There are things you can apply in almost all scenarios, like the loading bar on the top, but none of them are a single bullet. If you want to go for the great experience, you actually have to put the work and create something more adapted to your application and to how the users interact and the actual thing they are interacting with. So we can have some loading indicator that is always there if it's loading. We can have an error message if there is an errors, because this is something we often forget, but it's at least displaying that something went wrong. Then if everything went right, we display whatever we want to display, in this case some products, and if you really want to, you can display a skeleton if we are still loading things. The state that I'm showing is actually can have three possible values. We have the pending state, which has nothing, has undefined data and knowledge errors, and success is going to have data but no error, and an error might have data if the previous query was successful, otherwise it's undefined, and then it has a defined error. Because one of the things you're going to notice is that we don't want to manually query, we don't want to manually fetch information. When we want the library, when in this case Pinia Colada, to fetch for us. This is going to help us reduce the friction as well. And so we have more things, right? This is just a little gist of it. We have state, but also have access to the direct properties, because sometimes it's more convenient to access to the data, the error, and the status. We also have refresh and refetch, and they are connected. These functions are going to help us manually, and I say it again, manually, so we are not going to use them that often, fetch the data again, and they're connected to the key. Why? Because no matter how many times you call refresh, even in multiple components with the same use query with the same key, you still have just one single call. In fact, you even have the exact same promise instance. And this is going to be one of the key aspects, is that we have what we call centralized data. Now, think about this. When you are on a page, you're updating your profile picture because you just signed up. And usually your profile picture is displayed in multiple places. You have the nav bar, very often has your avatar. And then on the page you are on, when you update your avatar, you also change the image. If you update your image or your name or whatever, and it only changes in one place, it doesn't feel very trustworthy. The application feels a little bit wonky, and this is the kind of things we want to avoid. And it's actually, on the idea, very simple. You just have to centralize the data. In practice, it's a little bit harder than that. So this is how we centralize data here with a key. We define keys, and we're going to see that they can actually be hierarchical. So we can have, we can use these keys it has an array, so we can pass products to get anything that starts with product, but also you can have objects in the parts of the key, and you can have partial matching on the objects and arrays. So it's pretty cool. And then we have this query cache. Now the query cache is going to play a central role on the centralization, because when we use a query, this is going to connect to the cache, and then mutations are also going to connect to the cache. So this disconnection from the mutations and the queries going through the query cache allows us to spawn them in different places of our application, and we connect them via the keys, but they don't actually know each other. They don't have to know that they are interacting with the same data. They just need to use the same key, and then everything is going to work. They're going to use the same data, the same source of truth. And one of the funny things I like to say about the query cache is that often when we think about a cache, we think about optimizing the amount of requests. And this is true for a server cache. You want to not send too many requests to the server, but for the client, it's not exactly about sending less requests. Sometimes it is, but most of the time we actually send more requests than without it. The idea is about being smart on when do we send these requests. And what we want is having a page that shows up-to-date information. So that's why we usually send more requests, because we're going to be able to control when to fetch this information. And in order to do that, we have to talk about fresh or stale data, which is the main concept of a cache. When you fetch the data for the first time, this data is going to be fresh. It means that we know this is the correct data that the server has, this data. And what we do is we define a stale time in milliseconds that is going to define after how long the data is no longer fresh and is considered stale, which means that the server probably or maybe has a new version of it. And it doesn't mean that we have to immediately fetch this information. We don't want to fetch the data every 5 seconds or every 10 seconds or 1 minute. We could if we wanted to, and this is something you can do with a plugin. But the idea is that after 5 seconds in the cache, this data is marked as stale. So the next time the application needs to use this query with the key product, is going to refetch it automatically. And because we already had data there from the previous request, in your application you have your data already being displayed, but in the background, the new version is going to be fetched again, and it's going to be automatically updated without you having to do anything at all. And because we have access to all these async status and all the properties, you can display any loading experience if you want, or be more creative, which is something I'm going to show you later, but you can make things a little bit grayed out, for example, so it's not as apparent, it doesn't attract attention that much, but it still conveys the message of, hey, things are loading here. And so this is going to help us reduce the wait time also. Now, I'm going to tell you a little story about wait times that I really like in the real world. This is a story about the baggage claim in an airport in Houston. So they were receiving a lot of complaints because they were waiting a lot of time, saying that, I don't know, they were waiting 7 minutes for luggage in the baggage claim. They were just there standing and waiting for the luggage. And in the airport, to address these complaints, they did something very curious. They moved the arrival of the plane further away from the baggage claim. What happened is that before that, the baggage claim was very close to the airplane. And so people would just spend a few minutes, 1-2 minutes, to get to the baggage claim and then just wait, doing nothing at all. And by moving the airplane, the people will get off the plane and then just walk more like 7 minutes to get to the baggage claim, or 10, whatever. But this time was spent doing something, just walking. And then when they arrived to the baggage claim, they didn't have to wait that much. The baggage claim, the luggage will arrive a few minutes later, so they will spend maybe 1-2 minutes waiting for the luggage, and suddenly everything is fast. It's like, oh, we just waited for 1 minute and the luggage got here. And they completely dropped the amount of complaints they were receiving. And you might be wondering, how the hell does this apply to web? Well, the key is trick your users into thinking they are not waiting, because this is what we do in real life. Waiting is a pain. Like, you don't want to be waiting, doing nothing. It's just painful. So you have to trick your users into thinking they do not wait, but not, you can be smart about it. And I think these are the 3 metrics you should use, these 3 limits that were computed in a way by Jacob Nielsen in 1993. He was doing studies, and there is a paper on it, but the gist of it is, if the delay of an interaction from the user, by no matter the reason, it can be a synchronous operation or other things can be happening locally. If it's under 100 milliseconds, it feels instant. You cannot notice, we cannot notice the difference. If it's between 100 milliseconds and 1 second, you're going to notice that delay, but you're going to stay on the flow of thought. So you're still going to be using the application as if you're using the application as if nothing happens. You just wait a little bit, but keep doing things, right? That 1 second is not going to bother your user. In this case, you might want to start displaying a loader or some state indicator of, hey, we're loading things, it's taking a bit longer. Under 100 milliseconds, you should never display anything because it feels the same as instant. So displaying something is just going to create layout shift and confusion because it's something flashes. Between 1 second and 10 seconds, you definitely have to display that loading state to the user. They might stay there and wait, right, for things to happen. They probably don't like it, but it will stay there. And they might think about something else, but more or less is fine. However, if it goes over 10 seconds, the user is gonna just move to another tab, okay? And you might think, what API call takes over 10 seconds? Well, think about the last time you used ChatGPT. If the response takes too long to display, you're just gonna do something and go to your emails or change to another task. Now, streaming the response is just one other trick to make you feel like you're not waiting. But sometimes you cannot actually check the content without reading the whole reply, the whole generation of the message. So this is basically it. And in Pinia Colada, one of the things you can do, very simple, is use a delay plugin that delays the async status. So it helps you delay the spinners. And so you just add the plugin to the plugin, in this case, to Pinia Colada. And then you have this new property, which is magically available and typed. And you can display in milliseconds. You can define in milliseconds how long should setting async status to loading to true. So let me give you a demo. When using this plugin, for example, here I have some asynchronous operation. Everything here is asynchronous. It goes to the server, and you can see that everything is pretty fast. It seems almost instant. You can maybe notice a little delay, but honestly, if you were using these as a user, the delays wouldn't be a problem. Now let me show you the exact same version without the plugin, okay? Where I have some loading indicators. And you're gonna see fetching, oh, it appeared. Oh, it flashed very quickly. And I don't know about the quality of the video, how is it there? So maybe you don't see these precisely on the video, but you have the slides if you want to check by yourself. The point is, because we are showing the fetching state, we have two problems. First, it's proven that it actually feels slower. And second, we have layout shift and something flashing, and this is not something you want to avoid. So if you can avoid displaying a spinner when you know that operations are always fast and they're rarely taking time, you should do it. Okay, you should always do that. And then we have notations, and I'm gonna speed up a little bit because I'm running out of time. Notations are going to help you write, but what's interesting is not how you write. It's just you have a function, you can pass arguments this time because notations are never called by themselves. You have to call them manually. And you have similar things to queries, so you can reuse UI pieces and you can call them wherever you want. What's interesting about mutations is that when you use a mutation, you know that the data change on the server. So you can tell to the query cache, hey, I know these queries change, so I invalidate them. And what happens is that the query cache is going to mark them as stale immediately, but also if they are actively being used anywhere in your application, they're going to refetch them automatically. If not, they will not refetch them, but the next time you go to a page that are used, they're going to be refetched automatically. So we have these hooks on settle, and we have other ones that I'm gonna show you as well. Because we can go a little bit further than just automatically invalidating. We can predict the future. How? Well, we know the prefetching. We know if the user is going to click somewhere that we can prefetch the data. But something more interesting is optimistic updates. Now, what is this? This means that if the user do some operations, most of the time we know what we're gonna get back from the API. Now let me show you a demo. So this is a Nox demo. Let me just check that the screen is still visible. Yes. I have to log in with GitHub. I thought I was logged in. Should be good. So this is a normal application. I can add things, and there is a small delay when I add things. It's barely we can barely notice, but if I do a little folding, not that much, just slow 4G. If I add things now, I can see that the input stays disabled. Here it takes some time. Deleting doesn't allow me to go through them faster. But when we optimistically update the content, we don't have all these limitations. We can add things very naturally and delete them very naturally. So what's more complicated is handling the when things do not go well. But you will note something I want to note here is that, let me put it on slow. You will notice that while I'm adding things, they appear grayed out, and as they get validated, they become whiter. So this is a way of saying that things are loading. It hints the user that things are happening. You can display this differently, and again, there is no silver bullet. You have to adapt to the interface you have. All right. So the code for this is a bit long, so I'm actually gonna skip it. Sorry, but it's in the slide. You have to handle a couple of things. You have to say when you mutate, you enter the form. I get the data on the cache, and I'm gonna set the data on the cache to the new version. I think the API is gonna reply back. Then I'm gonna cancel any query because I know for a fact that they're not. If I'm fetching right now the to-dos, I know for a fact they are not gonna get me the right version, and then I return some information that I can use in all the other hooks. If I succeed, I can check. If I want to, I can use the data from the API to put it in the list. If I settle, so if it fails or succeeds, I'm gonna invalidate the queries anyway because I want to get the new version from the server just in case. And an error, I have to roll back if the data that is on the cache is still the one I added right before. Which is a bit interesting, but it's still a bit complicated. One thing that I'm gonna overlook too is how powerful you can go on adding custom things. So this is another part, right? Is that because there is no silver bullet, you also need a lot of control over how the cache do things. And sometimes you don't want to repeat yourself too much. So this is where plugins come into play. It allows you to really customize the behavior of things. So plugins are just going to use the Pinia API that allows you to hook on the actions of the query cache, and then you can check the name of the action, and then you get all the arguments, and you can add properties to the query, to use query. You can replace properties existing on the entry with new ones. For example, this one, the async status, I'm just creating a new customer that I customize on later on, and then you add all the types, and so you have really the same experience. You can really extend the library the way you want, and this is, I think, very important when you want to improve the UX, because, as I said, without a silver bullet, you have to be creative. And so, to put it all in a nutshell, Pina Colada allows you to avoid showing loader state too quickly. You have centralized data, so things are consistent and your user trusts your application. You can invalidate queries so they can be refetched automatically when things change. And you can easily use optimistic update to make the application feel even faster. But also, I want you to get creative. The idea is not to block you. Pina Colada gives you the tools, the data that you can use, but it doesn't give you an opinionated way of handling things. The idea is that I have noticed by practice that in applications there is really so many things of doing things. Sometimes it's nice to look at how we handle waiting times in other places and how we can adapt that. For example, in video games, they show fancy loaders or information that you can use. Or they use level of detail to load models in different scales depending on the distance you're at. So get creative, right? Get out there as well. Think about how we handle waiting times, even in real life scenarios. So yeah, give Pina Colada a try. It has a few features also that I haven't talked about, like the dev tools. It's very close to Vue 1. The API is very stable right now, and it's really nice to work with. So thank you for having me.
Hi, Eduardo. How are you doing?
Hey, thanks.
It was lovely having you here, and we have a bunch of questions from the audience, so let's get started.
Yeah.
Someone is asking, is it possible to use Pina Colada outside of Pina?
So it's this is the thing, you have to install Pinia and Pina Colada, but you could use Pina Colada without even using Pinia. It just uses the Pinia stores and the plugins
Okay, cool.
architecture.
Next question, how does Pina Colada fit Nuxt environment?
It just works. It has a plugin, a module, sorry, and it just works.
Amazing.
It's okay. Maybe the people are asking about the use async state or something like that. So it basically replaces that functionality in a more it has all the cache, the refetching automatic. So it has a more complex scenario that cannot be handled natively with Nuxt. I think maybe that might be the question. I'm trying to check the chat on the side at the same time. Sorry.
It's okay, but if people in the chat, like if people in the audience want more details, maybe they can let us know. Anyway, I will go to the next question, which is, will Pina Colada be added to Mastering Pina?
So it's true that I always forget about talking about this. Pina Colada is actually, it was born from mastering Pina in a way. There is a lesson where a lesson more like an exercise. One of the longest exercises is about how to build Pina Colada. So I think that if you like this, you should definitely buy Mastering Pina. I show how to build a basic version of Pina Colada from scratch, and it's very interesting. It really shows a lot of things in Pina that people are usually not aware of, like the plugins. I don't think we'll be adding a part of like a full course of Pina Colada to Mastering Pina, because that would be like a new whole course. So it had to be a new thing. We have something we're talking about something with Vue School, so stay tuned.
Absolutely, stay tuned. And in a bit, we will also share again some details about Mastering Pina, because we have an exclusive code writing right now, so people can get the course in a better price. Okay, one last question for you, and this was asked by more than one person. How is
Yeah.
this different than TimeStack for Vue?
Yeah, so this is normal because the question is very, very normal because some of the APIs are the same. Now, I did this on purpose because Tanstack Query was already very established, and I wanted to be able to reuse any knowledge that you can find on articles, but also any AI being trained on those content. So it can automatically spit out code that is going to work more or less for Pinia. It's very easy to make it work. Just change the name of some of the keys. The differences are going to be size. This library is 2.5 kilobytes. I think Tanstack Query is about 20 or 30. So it's a huge difference. Then it's really adapted to your reactivity. Tanstack Query isn't. There are things you cannot do with Tanstack Query, like some dynamic queries and refetching. It's not going to work. It's going to use the latest version of a dynamic ref on the fetching. So it can actually gives you bugs that are just inherent to some of the design decisions that are mainly based on how React works and how you use how hooks works in React, the fact that they are re-executed multiple times. And so this doesn't apply to composition API. So you are going to have, if you use Pina Colada, you have a more an API that just works with Vue. You have tools to make the reactivity work properly with the library, and a much lighter version of the library.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Eduardo, both for your presentation and answering all the questions.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. All right, we are going to be watching a quick video about mastering Pinia, and then we will come back.